Thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert. My name is Al Segalla. I'll be your host for this session, and also I'm president of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, who are always looking out for your property rights. We have quite a few episodes now, all of them interesting, and this is going to be no exception. Our guest this time is Supervisor Dennis Mills, who has a lot to say and a lot of knowledge, and we have so little time. Dennis, welcome.
How you doing?
It's just great. One of the things, we have a number of items to discuss, but probably the most important one would be the general plan process. It's pretty heavy-handed, and you've been right in the middle of it. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I have to be careful how much I say because, of course, the discussion is going to be coming up next Tuesday. I'd be more than happy to come back after that discussion so that I don't tip into the Brown Act and, in essence, tell other supervisors what my thoughts are.
Okay, it's almost like announcing how you're going to vote,
Exactly.
And that's against the Brown Act.
Exactly.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Well, some of the principles about property rights, I think you freely can talk about, whether it relates to the general plan or not. It seems like there's three rights that are recognized by the U.S. Constitution in the 5th and 14th Amendments, and that's life, liberty, and property. Uh-huh. And the one usually under the most attack is property rights. It seems as an approach, we need government, and government regulations can be good, or they can be hurtful. It seems if we had a principle to follow, it seems like we want government regulation to protect property rights, and the only time that would intrude on those would be for public safety.
So let's take that a step further, because the foundational element is that who really owns that property and who should have free, full use and enjoyment of that property.
Right.
The only way that government should be involved is when it steps into a conflict between two property holders, neighbors, so to speak,
right,
that can't seem to find a resolution on their own. Right. That's where government needs to intercede or intervene.
Or the courts.
But I think we really need to understand is how did general plans and all of this land use control get started? If you recall, it happened even going back before Philadelphia, but Philadelphia seems to be kind of the point that everybody looks at. Right. And it was actually to control races in neighborhoods.
Okay.
And so it got very controversial as to, and you understand the term redlining.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
My last name is Italian, so I would have to go to the Italian section.
You are correct, and it wasn't. If everybody says it's of color, it's not correct, because you remember it was the Irish that were the throwaway population, right, back in the after the potato famine, yeah, and the whole purpose of that was they made them firefighters because they were expendable. And so the Boston firefighters or wherever were, that was the race to get rid of, in essence.
Also,
and the Italians,
Irish cops are pretty famous too.
And Italians were the same way.
Yeah.
There were areas where you couldn't be if you were an Italian in Philadelphia back in those days. So this whole idea of general plan government control land use, it was an attempt to control population locations.
Yeah.
And that was a very onerous thing and not really suitable for the Constitution we had. And I think that the pushback had driven it to what it is today. But it still can become what I call very specific, yeah, and not general enough in its vision. And it should be a vision for the county, for the communities as a whole, as to what direction do we want to go.
Which direction do the property owners want to go? That's
the key. That really is the key.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a general plan that's gone before the voters?
No.
Isn't that interesting? I just got your mind going a little bit there.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Well, we're willing to put other things before the voters to have them decide. Well, that just seems one of those things. But remember, too, that in land use, the state has given all the sole authority and discretion to the counties and the cities. The municipalities have that authority,
yeah,
and we become quasi-judicial when we rule on issues regarding land use. So we deal with facts. That's what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
So.
And honesty.
And honesty, yes. This recent Supreme Court ruling, I think, has been very helpful to kind of move away from people having to run the full process in state courts, and now can move directly to federal court when they feel that there is a taking that's occurred. And land use easily, or general plans could easily take property rights and the uses of properties from people that I think that they need to push back. They need to say, no, it's mine, and I will do with it as I see fit as long as I don't hurt my neighbor.
You know, I think if our Constitution were taught in our schools, we wouldn't have half the problems we have now.
And it was a required course when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So,
of course, that was a few years ago.
A few years ago, yes. That's true. That's true.
Now, also, we're discussing the power safety shutoff for public awareness.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion, and I know PG&E has done public outreach in our communities regarding that to bring people's awareness up. We don't want people to be in a situation where they're being reactive to the moment, so to speak, like being a victim. Yeah. They need to think through how are they going to respond. If you remember when the Darby fire took out the flume going into Angels Camp and Murphy's.
I remember that.
And I said, what's the point of being here when there's really no good water supply? I want on vacation back to the Midwest.
Yeah.
So maybe the opportunity would present itself that people would leave the area, and that we would bring in additional police force or sheriff's department, or to cover their residences so there's not burglaries, et cetera, when they're gone. But if everybody buys a generator, now how are we working on that carbon sequestration and greenhouse gases thing? It is self-defeating in its purpose. So hopefully not everybody, because you remember, generators have caused fires in Calaveras County.
Yeah, true.
The last 2 or 3 years.
I plan to get a generator.
Okay, all right.
Well, an emergency generator.
I was listening to the discussion with CCWD. I know that the City of Angels has had the discussion. Copper Fire, Murphy Sanitary. I go to a lot of these various meetings, and it isn't so much whether or not they have generators. Some of them do not have the right ones in the right places that they need, but it's fuel. Because if your infrastructure is only going to run for 10 hours on the fuel that you're able to store, well, now do you have to have another convault? Where does this fall within CUPA, which is to be sure that the environmental side is taken care of? And how are we going to have fuel deliveries? Is Hunt and Sons or whoever's going to deliver fuel here capable of doing it? So the sheriff and I and one other supervisor went to Cal OES at Mather and sat down and had that conversation about how can they support, what can they support, and that kind of thing.
Well, propane is one of the solutions.
It could be, but the point is that this would be a planned event. It's not an emergency.
Right.
So, do you drag the California National Guard in and be prepared to pay for it? Probably, if you do.
Well, I think PG&E is given notice. They plan to do deliberate shutdowns of power when they think fire conditions are acute enough.
Right, and they're doing some test runs in the week that we're in right now. They're up in West Point. They were in Angels Camp, just kind of getting the boots on the ground and seeing exactly what it's going to take to inspect every line as they're wanting to do before they re-energize. But, we heard the initial conversation was 5 days. It could be up to 7 days. But if we have a red flag event, which is high winds and high temperatures in, say, September, which we do have, we could be out of power for 5 to 7 days, and people should plan accordingly and have their go bags and be able to sustain themselves.
Well, what about everything in the freezer? You lose everything in the freezer unless you can preserve that some way.
You could. So I know that we're looking at also, being sure that we have identified people that have mobility issues, people that are on oxygen.
Right.
So that, and about our Calaveras Alert System now. It's in the center of our main webpage, and I would recommend strongly to everyone. We have, by the way, the highest amount of people who have signed up in our county. It's over 15,000 have signed up for it already. And what that does is whether it's advisory evacuations or mandatory evacuations, just because someone thinks of an evacuation route as being where they go all the time when they come and go from their home, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the evacuation route that's of choice to get them moved to a different location safely.
Yeah.
So we might be looking at a place where they need to be sheltered, or maybe an area for cooling centers. All of that will be explained to them if they can get that downloaded to their phone or to their computer, so they can be properly notified.
How would one get information to get on the notification system?
All you do is go to the little running person in the center of the Calaveras County website's page, click on it. If you have a cell phone, just to the right of that is a square. And that's a little bit more modified version, so it doesn't suck up a lot of your space in your phone.
Yeah.
But you can then have it so it's an instant alert that comes up on your cell phone, or it comes up on your computer, or they will call you.
Okay, so you need to give them your phone number in addition to linking
your address. Now, people who live in the Bay Area or do not live in Calaveras County, please don't put your address where you're currently living. If this is your alternate home or your second home, you need to put the address for your second home. Otherwise, we're not going to call you. We're not going to tell you about it.
Yeah, true.
So,
all right. Another item we have to talk about is Cal OES and Cal National Guard meeting.
Right. So what that was is that we sat down with the heads. There's anybody that had, I think, 4 stars. In fact, the head of Cal OES right now is the former sheriff from Merced County.
Oh, really?
So already have a connection to some degree and understands the resource issues in the Mountain Counties area. But we also had the Sergeant Major of the California National Guard in that meeting as well, just to kind of get a handshake and get to know one another, because you don't want to be building relationships in an emergency.
Right.
You want to be able to already had those contacts and kind of know where everybody is and what their capacity is to perform.
How's our OES?
We have a new OES director and doing great. I'm sure he's drinking from a fire hose right now. But he'll get it. He'll understand it. And I know that we have a great support system around him. So he'll be able to, make it work. And
in the past, coordination on emergency was handled through the Sheriff's Department, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. This time, the Sheriff's, Fire, and other departments would be looking to the OES director for communication with the other government entities. Is that how?
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting even going that, because OES has a unique position and a unique role in support.
Right.
They're not in essence the ones that run an incident. They don't control an incident. The Sheriff's Department will do that. Fire districts will do that. Cal Fire, et cetera. But they're the support mechanism. If as an incident commander, if I was to call out and say I need this type of equipment, it would be handed off to them, and their logistics people would go to work on how to get it there and where to put it.
Oh, okay. So that's hands-on.
It's primarily logistics, if you want to look at it in that way.
Okay.
So
Lake Tulloch alignment with Tuolumne County, FERC, and Tri-Dam. That's kind of complicated, but maybe you can clarify.
That's a wide world of sports there. Tuolumne County. We had been talking with Tuolumne County last year about the possibility of a joint powers authority for the lake, and to try to get some uniformity in how we're providing services down there. Now, you know that during the Memorial Day weekend, July 4th weekend, et cetera, there was kind of an aha moment, and Copper Fire was kind enough to place a paramedic on the Marine Safety Patrol boat out on the lake.
Oh, wow.
And so it was first.
Yeah.
But it was because it's such a busy lake. We've had deaths, we've had injuries out there, and more presence that we put on the lake, the better it is. But right now, Tuolumne County is the one that is deciding to permit docks and to inspect docks and to be sure that everything's done. Because once you place a dock, now the Boating and Waterways Code requires the Sheriff's Department to come in and decide what is the 5-mile to 200-foot limit on where you can set a buoy, so to speak, and keep people away from it. So there's a whole long list of things that Tuolumne County is doing that Calaveras County is currently not. They're leaving it for Tri-Dam to do. I was up to the last Tri-Dam meeting up in Strawberry here a week ago, and some of their directors had expressed, why doesn't Calaveras County take this on? I've had meetings with our staff as well as our elected at the county to talk about maybe the JPA isn't the answer. Maybe the answer is that we start to mirror some of the things that Tuolumne County has done in that dock ordinance. Maybe it's finding ways to properly fund marine safety out there and be sure that we can adequately support. It's the only lake we're receiving $0 from to provide marine safety patrols.
Right.
So, let's find a way to be sure that we can keep everybody safe on that lake.
I like to fish in Lake Tulloch, and I like the idea of the big speedboats not getting too close to me.
Well, we've got another issue going on with what we call wake runners, or wave runners. They're the boats that they suck up a lot of water and sink way low in the water, and they can do 5 miles an hour and create a wave that has a white cap on it.
Oh, wow.
And they're starting to use them at Lake Tulloch. That has been a concern. How do we address that? Because even in a 5 mile an hour zone, they can create some nasty wakes.
What's the advantage of having a boat so low in the water and so heavy?
Well, because then they can put people right back behind them, and they can be on like surfboards and having a good time.
At 5 miles an hour?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Wow.
So they could probably add enough water the equivalent of a Chevy Impala into those boats. You ought to see them when they're pumping water out of them.
Wow.
It's quite amazing. And they're not cheap. These are $100,000 plus boats.
Wow.
So
I never knew about that.
the pressure's on in the Lake Tulloch area, though, to start to establish some type of uniformity and control for safety.
Oh, there was that raises an interesting issue that was before the Board of Supervisors a while back, and former Supervisor Russ Thomas put together a plan with the property owners and he did a lot of work to allow people to access the westerly shore of New Maloney's to launch their boats.
Right.
And
he did.
And that fizzled out.
Well, he got a board resolution passed to approve that. He had some conversations with the Bureau of Reclamation. I am continuing those discussions with them. And I think that it can't be off the table simply because we need to move the congestion that we have at Lake Tulloch to somewhere else, and the only somewhere else happens to be New Maloney's.
Yeah.
Now, along those same lines, I know that everybody's very aware of Oroville, and they're also very aware that New Maloney's spillway has never been tested. So I have been asking for a meeting with the Army Corps to take the head geologist for the state of California out to the spillway and local elected officials and people of interest to actually inspect it and be sure that everything's fine. There's not going to be a problem should New Maloney's overtop, and I think the Army Corps and Bureau has done an excellent job this year in maintaining the 200% snowpack and being sure that it stayed all lake, in the lake.
Yeah.
And even though they had to have some very high flows on the Stanislaus, nothing that wasn't contained within the flood banks.
Yeah.
So kudos to them. I think I was very concerned with the amount of snowpack, because last week, and we're talking about here's past the middle of July,
right?
And our ranchers who have grazing rights up there in the high country are just now getting their cattle in the high country because of snow.
Yeah,
it's still there. So it's quite amazing how much water has come down. But going back to your issue about through Doc Morrissey's property, into Maloney's, that's still a conversation that's ongoing. I was there when the Bureau was making their presentation on the 3 million visitor use days to New Maloney's and how this is going to change the economy of our area.
Yeah. And
it never panned out. It never panned out to what they wanted.
Yeah.
So, we have an option here. It's on the table. It's been on the table for a long time. And if we can continue to work with the Congressman's office and continue to push it, I think that something eventually will happen. But we're not going to see it. It's not instant.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of that. It's the left turn pocket there at Dutchess and O'Byrne's Ferry Road for going into Poker Flat.
Yeah.
That's something that's been on the books since, 1995. And believe it or not, in the last board meeting last Tuesday, we approved putting it out to bids. It's fully funded.
What's that left turn lane you're talking about?
Left turn lane, and it will be constructed by the end of the year.
Oh, that's cool.
So, this just popped into my head. I might as well mention, there's a checklist, and we're running the checklist.
I was hoping, our Taxpayer Association would like to get information to the public as much as they can, and one of the things that we could do is maybe get a copy of the videotape of that board meeting when Russ put his presentation together. He had Google Earth, and it was quite impressive, but I've forgotten when it was and what month.
I was estimating, because I talked to Russ about it, and we have a good working relationship, and he being on CCWD, it fits very well.
Yeah.
So, he's got all of his paperwork together, and we're going to continue to use the information he has. There's been some recent changes in ownership and some of the other properties that would abut that. Yeah. But I've had conversations with them as well, and they don't seem to have an objection. And we could also make use of the Prop 68 money that's out there. Remember, that passed in November. We just basically put back together our Parks and Rec Commission to be able to take advantage of some of those funding opportunities. Copperopolis, for instance, is one that's identified as, where are the parks?
Yeah, right.
There's no recreation areas other than the lake, and there's really no public access to the lake. And so how do we work this out? So I appointed somebody from Copperopolis to serve on the Parks and Rec Commission and be sure that Copperopolis is adequately represented in those decisions of how we fund projects in that local community.
Well, we have a new business group there called the Copperopolis Area Business Association, CABA, and it's just a little baby now trying to learn how to walk. And I was thinking that one of the projects that could probably have a town hall about would be a presentation on that western access to New Maloney's, because it would dramatically affect the economy in Copperopolis in a positive way. Anyway, so we'll see what happens.
Nothing that you do with the federal government is instant.
Yeah, true.
And to some degree, that might be a good thing because it takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah. Also, anybody with power can also do a lot of harm.
Yes. Yeah. So you want things to have things very methodical and very slow. But I think that it's generating political will. Yeah. It's keeping the conversation alive. And, and when the opportunity presents itself, then we'll be ready to move.
Okay, we have a pilot EIR on fuel reduction projects.
Yes.
What is that about?
I went to the California Forestry Association and I talked to SPI, and we had a number of joint meetings on this issue because in California, to do fuel reduction projects, they have to go through their own CEQA process and develop their own environmental impact report. And that could take as much as a third of their total dollars available just doing the paperwork to make it work and make it functional. The problem is something that even the federal government admits through the NEPA process, is they literally had 800 pages of NEPA documents that they've now reduced down to 40 pages. And instead of having to go out years of environmental review, that they can probably turn something around in as little as a month and a half to 2 months. Yeah. So likewise, the state had agreed to do that, is develop a pilot project with 600 fuel reduction projects and under one blanket EIR, and decide whether or not that's going to work. And so far, it's been very successful because we've been able to divert the money that we were using for a lot of... All that really needs to happen here is a forester needs to say, make this area look like this picture. And when we come back, that's what it should look like. There shouldn't be a whole lot of need for additional studies or reviews than just...
Now, as I understand fuel reduction, you remove brush and have adequate spacing for trees. Is that
ladder fuels
and remove ladder fuels so that it's less likely to have a forest fire.
We're becoming one of the premier counties in California on fuel reduction projects. Every one of our major metropolitan centers has fire breaks around them right now. everybody's looking at how we're doing it. We have the Burners Group. We have the Foothill Fire Safe Council. We have CAL FIRE involved. It's just coming at us from various. In fact, we've got the Upper McCollum River Association's done multiple projects up there in the high country. As fuel reduction project. If you go up Highway 4 past Big Trees Village, and look what we've done up there. So to say it's not happening, it is happening. In fact, we just had a problem recently in trying to get a fuel break done between Angels Camp and Glory Hole.
Yeah.
And CAL FIRE was having problems getting a NEPA document out of Bureau of Reclamation. Well, we went up there and sat with them and said, what's it going to take? And I had the congressman's staff sitting there with me and my assistant CAO. And so, let's get in. Within 2 weeks, they had the document out, and it was about 3 weeks ago they did the control burn.
Oh, cool.
On Whittle Road going out, so that people coming out of there dragging chains on boats or whatever may happen. Sure enough, last week we had somebody pull off to the side of the road on Whittle Road. Their their Blazer was on fire. And
it was blazing.
It was blazing. But the point is that it gave us a buffer there between Glory Hole and Greenhorn Creek and Finnegan Lane, et cetera, which was CAL FIRE admits that was long overdue. So.
What about grass fires?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I know Rex Whittle had come to me and asked, how do we get grazing permits on BLM land and Bureau of Reclamation land around New Maloney's?
Yeah.
So I know how slow things go, that we went through just a preliminary process this year, but I'd like to get, since these are landowners and ranches that are adjacent to federal property, why can't they just move their cattle over and graze down that area?
Well, that's fireproofing it.
Under a grazing permit, very simple, and they're not having to do a whole lot of work. The cattle are already there.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I'm asking for that to be done, not only in the Calaveras side, but the Tuolumne side of New Maloney's around the rim, and getting that grazed down with local ranchers.
Goats would be also good.
Well, the city was using goats, if you remember, on their spray field for quite a while. And there's a limited number of goats out there.
And also there's not that much demand for goat meat.
There is in the valley. This is interesting.
So you've taken a long journey since you've been on our Board of Supervisors. And we're at the end of our show.
Oh, my.
And I'm so
sorry.
We've got maybe 30 seconds.
Okay.
And what would your parting thoughts would be?
I would like to be able to come back again as soon as we get this general plan discussed at the board, and be able to explain to the public and to you exactly how I've come to the conclusions I've come to. Okay, well, that's good. Well, we want to thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert. We hope to see you next time. Have a great evening.